the overthrow of Francisco Macías Nguema, a turning point in Equatorial Guinea. Introduction: A Nation in Crisis. On August 3, 1979, the small West African nation of Equatorial Guinea witnessed a dramatic and bloody turning point in its history. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, a military officer and nephew of the country's dictator, Francisco Macías Nguema, staged a successful coup d'etat that ended his uncle's brutal 11-year reign. The coup was not merely a power grab within a family dynasty. It was a violent response to a regime marked by repression, economic collapse, and widespread atrocities, including the genocide of the Bubi people. Following the overthrow, Macías was arrested, put on trial, and ultimately executed by firing squad on September 29, 1979. This sequence of events marked the end of one of Africa's most tyrannical rulers and the beginning of Obiang's rule, which, while initially promising reform, would later draw comparisons to his uncle's despotism. The rise and fall of Francisco Macías Nguema independence and the rise to power. Francisco Macías Nguema came to power in 1968 when Equatorial Guinea gained independence from Spain. As the country's first president, he initially presented himself as a nationalist leader intent on unifying the nation, which consists of a mainland region, Rio Muni, and several islands, including Bioko, home to the Bubi ethnic group. However, his rule quickly devolved into a reign of terror. Macías consolidated power by eliminating political opposition, banning political parties, and declaring himself president for life in 1972. A reign of terror, his regime was characterized by paranoia, erratic behavior, and a cult of personality that rivaled some of the most infamous dictators of the 20th century. He outlawed religion, closed schools, and drove the country's economy into ruin, forcing much of the educated elite and foreign workers to flee. The population lived in constant fear, subject to arbitrary arrests, torture, and executions carried out by Macías's loyalists. The genocide of the Bubi people, one of the darkest chapters of Macías's rule, was his systematic persecution of the Bubi people, an ethnic minority native to Bioko Island. The Bubi, who had historically resisted colonial rule and maintained a distinct cultural identity, became targets of Macías's wrath. His government, dominated by members of his own Fang ethnic group from the mainland, viewed the Bubi as a threat to national unity, or, more likely, to his personal dominance. Throughout the 1970s, thousands of Bubi were killed, tortured, or imprisoned in what many historians and human rights organizations have described as genocide. Entire villages were razed, and estimates suggest that up to a third of the Bubi population perished or fled during Macías's tenure. The coup of August 3, 1979, a nation on the brink by 1979, Equatorial Guinea was a nation on the brink of collapse. The economy, once buoyed by cocoa exports, had crumbled under mismanagement and neglect. It was in this context that Teodoro Obiang, then a lieutenant colonel in the military and Macías's nephew, decided to act. Obiang had served as a key figure in his uncle's regime, notably as the head of the National Guard and military governor of Bioko. His proximity to power gave him both the means and the opportunity to orchestrate the coup. The bloody takeover on August 3, 1979, Obiang's forces clashed with Macías's loyalists in a brief but bloody confrontation. Macías fled the capital, Malabo, but was captured weeks later, hiding in the mainland jungle. The coup was initially met with cautious optimism both domestically and internationally, as many saw Obiang as a liberator who had freed the nation from a madman's grip. The trial and execution of Macías, a public reckoning. In September 1979, Francisco Macías Nguema was brought before a military tribunal in Malabo. The trial was a spectacle, designed as much to legitimize Obiang's takeover as to deliver justice. Macías faced charges of genocide, mass murder, embezzlement, and treason. The prosecution focused heavily on his role in the Bubi genocide, presenting evidence of massacres, forced labor camps, and systematic extermination campaigns. Witnesses recounted horrific tales of violence, including the execution of entire families and the destruction of Bubi cultural sites. The final verdict, Macías, unrepentant and reportedly delusional, offered little in his defense, at times claiming divine protection or blaming subordinates for the atrocities. The outcome of the trial was never in doubt. On September 29, 1979, he was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad in Malabo's Black Beach prison, a notorious site where many of his own victims had been killed. The execution was carried out by a Moroccan military unit, reportedly because local soldiers refused to shoot their former leader. The aftermath and Obiang's rule. Initial reforms and hope. In the immediate aftermath, Obiang took steps to distance himself from his uncle's excesses. He reopened schools, restored diplomatic relations with Western nations, and invited foreign investment to revive the economy. Political prisoners were released, and some semblance of normalcy began to return. Foreign governments, including Spain and France, expressed hope that the change in leadership would stabilize the country. A legacy in question Macías's death marked the end of an era, but it also raised questions about the future. Would Obiang truly break from his uncle's legacy, or would he merely replace one form of tyranny with another? Over time, Obiang's rule, still ongoing as of March 3, 2025, has been criticized for authoritarianism, corruption, and human rights abuses, though it has never reached the sheer brutality of Macías's regime. Conclusion. A complex legacy, the overthrow, trial, and execution of Francisco Macías Nguema remain pivotal moments in Equatorial Guinea's history. They reflect the turmoil of post-colonial Africa, where the promise of independence often gave way to dictatorship and violence. While Obiang's coup ended a nightmare for many, it also set the stage for a new chapter that has yet to fully escape the shadow of its past.